Hello, friends. Welcome to Reconstructing Cave Story, episode 35. In this episode, we're going to make, quote, fire a projectile whenever we press X, more or less. Um, yeah, so that's the problem we're going to be solving. You know, the polar star should be firing a projectile whenever the player presses X, just kind of like the player should jump whenever you press Z. Actually almost identical to that in terms of implementation for the fire button portion of it, but for the projectile portion of it, we're going to actually make our projectile shoot outwards in the direction that we're looking and then not worry about it anymore. This, for now, is going to be private to Polar Star, and actually, we'll talk about this more soon, as in an upcoming episode, not now. So it's going to need a couple things. This level 1 projectile class is going to need an update so that it can move. Typical. It's going to need a draw method so we can see it. Again, typical. It's going to need an X and Y position, but instead of just an X and Y position, I'm really going to do the offset kind of business where we just have the start X and the start Y, and then we just kind of figure out which direction we're going based on a horizontal facing and a vertical facing, and then calculate an offset. And the reason for that is later on, we're not going to do it in this episode, but later on we're going to have to kill the projectile after it's gone so far, so that's why we're doing this way. So yeah, let's get started. So I want to start in the game class and kind of work in a top-down sort of way for this. And maybe you'll see why, and maybe you won't. Maybe I'll have to tell you. It's fine. It's fine if I do. So right here, I'm going to copy all this player jump logic and make some player fire logic. And I don't mean fire as in... Yeah, I'm not going to make that joke. Just kidding. So I'm going to make a start fire and a stop fire. And instead of SDLKZ, I'm going to replace that with X. And yeah, it's not implemented, so let's go into our player class and implement it. So player.h and player.cc, and just again copy and paste start jump and stop jump, and rename these to start fire and stop fire. Did I do it above in game CC? It doesn't matter, but I'm just being silly. So I'll rename these to start fire and stop fire. I was just matching the order. This is player fire, then player jump, player fire, then player jump. It's stupid. Don't do that. It's a waste of time. Man. Okay. Start jumping. So right below, look horizontal for me, or wherever you want to put it, I guess, is fine. And all I'm going to do right here is just forward this call down to our polar star. So polar star dot start fire and polar star dot stop fire. But for our start fire, we are going to want to know in our polar star which direction we're facing. So we can pass in our horizontal facing and our vertical facing. And I suppose that's it. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So let's open, I'll leave this open for now, but let's open polarstar.cc and .h so that we can implement start fire and stop fire. And stop fire is going to be easy, so we'll do that one first. Polarstar.h. What is it going to be? Void, stop fire, doesn't take anything. It's not const, but it doesn't do anything, so that's done. Now for start fire. That's going to need to take in a horizontal facing and a vertical facing. And let's name these horizontal facing and vertical facing. Okay, so right now we are I'm gonna implement the start fire. I'm gonna flesh it out and just make sure that everything's getting called correctly before I go any further. It's just always a good idea just to make sure everything's hooked up right. I mean, it's not always a good idea, but sometimes it's a good idea, and right now I feel like it's a good idea, so we're doing it. What? Sorry, I keep going back and forth. So I'm going after the draw method. I'll just put in this start fire method. Gosh dang it. Alright, so I'll just put in a printf fire. Build and run. Building. I'll bring the console over this time so you guys can see it. And I'm going to press X. Fire, fire, fire. Okay, sweet. So everything's getting called right. So we can get rid of this fire and actually implement it. Okay, so the main thing we need for this start fire, the main thing we need to figure out is where our bullet X and bullet Y are so that we can create our projectile from there. And we are calculating our bullet X and bullet Y right here. So I'm actually just going to delete this and move it over. And then turns out we need our gun X and gun Y. So we're going to need to figure that out too. So, ooh. Yeah, dang. Okay, so yeah. Let's figure out what we need to calculate our gun X and gun Y. It looks like our gun X gets calculated from a horizontal facing and our player X. And then our gun Y gets vertical facing and gun up and player Y. So let's make some helper functions just to not do the same math twice. How does that sound, guys? So horizontal facing and player X for our... So this will turn units of game. So gun X. And this is going to take in a horizontal facing, like I said, again. I'm saying it partly for me, too. Horizontal facing and a player X. Let's make it const. And we can just return let's see, if horizontal facing is equal to left, then we can return player X minus units K half tile. Otherwise, just player X. And again, I just got that from right here. So I'm just going to set X to be gun X right here. Giving it horizontal facing and X. Yeah, I should make a new variable for this, but I'll do that in a second. So we'll need one for gun Y, except this time it's going to need different data and return a different value. So gun Y, vertical facing, and player Y. This one's bigger, so I'm going to just implement it inside of here. So that is what I'm going to do. Polar star. Okay, so this is going to go in here. Units game gun Y is equal to player Y, and I'll have to change all those to gun Ys. Return gun Y. Oh yeah, that's the other thing we need to take in, this gun up, so I'll add that. Oops. This should be gun. One more thing. It's nice I'm not actually thinking about the algorithm itself, I'm just thinking about how to move it into a new function. So it's like all the thinking has already been done, I just have to think about how to move it right now. And that takes a little bit of practice, but it's a very good skill to have, because otherwise you will be thinking about algorithms when you don't need to be. So this should be y equals gun y, vertical facing, gun up, and player y. So let's rename these to gun x and gun y. Ugh, I can't name them that. How about x and y, and rename these to player x and player y? I like that better. There's less refactoring involved. That should be an x. Player y. Okay, so now we need to get this bullet x and bullet y. No, let's not draw that in here anymore. Sweet, that's done. So this needs to be... Okay, so our start fire actually needs to take in an x and a y. Now back to here, back to our regularly scheduled program. So I'm going to do gun x, passing it in x, and gun y, passing it in y, but also passing it in horizontal facing and vertical facing. And then we're also going to need to know if our gun needs to be up. So let's add that in here. So I just added gun up to start fire. Let me add it to the H file too. So up here in start fire. And when we call this in our player class, we need to pass the necessary information. And then also I'm going to add in our position. So I'll just add that to the beginning. So player X and player Y. What? Horizontal facing. Okay. And this is it, I promise. I'm not going to add more to start fire. But let me add this into our CC file. Okay. Yeah, let's go into our player class and make sure we call with all the necessary information. So the X and the Y, that's easy. But the gun up we have calculated up here, so let's make another small function so that we don't have to do it more than once. Yeah, I'll just make it private. Player.h. Bring it over here. I'll just copy and paste it. It'll be easy this way. Down at the bottom near on ground. Make it const. Have it return this mess. Yeah? Yeah. And then inside of here, get rid of this, and instead call this. What is it not happy with? Okay, it's happy. I don't know what happened. Okay, this has been bugging me for a while. I just deleted this comment. Sorry. Where was I? Start fire. Because that needs a gun up, so let's add that. Whew. I think I could build now, and I'm going to build and just see if it's all building. Okay, cool. It is. So that was a little bit tricky. Let me just go over it again, what I did. So the start fire, I was wrong. It needed more than just a horizontal facing and a vertical facing. It also needs to know where we are so that we can figure out where, and also whether the gun is up or down. So I just kind of moved that gun up Boolean that we had up here into its own private method. Once I did that, well, I kind of did this in a weird order, but our start fire, let's look at our start fire again. So again, we were calculating our bullet X and bullet Y up here in our polar stars draw method. We're in our polar stars start fire now. But instead I moved it down into our start fire so that later when we want to create our projectile using bullet X and bullet Y. Okay, so that's why we calculated this here. And then I made these helper functions, gun X and gun Y, to help calculate where the gun needs to be given the necessary information. So the gun Y is based on vertical facing, gun up, and player Y. And this is all the stuff we calculated in our original draw method. So that's that. Now let's keep going. So let's go into our start fire and actually create a projectile. Let's go into our polar star and actually can make a class that we can use to create a projectile. Let's do that first. So I'm actually just going to call it projectile. Believe it or not, I changed my mind. I don't want to call it level 1 projectile yet. So it's going to need to take in a couple things to construct it. Again, let's look at what I said we were going to put in it, our start X and our start Y, and then horizontal facing and vertical facing. So let's take all that stuff in when we construct it. And then let's also take the sprites in when we construct it, because we don't have a graphic, so we can't like construct it. Yeah, we'll just take them in. So no, I don't want a shared polymorphic class. Shared pointer to sprite. We'll call this horizontal sprite. Shared pointer for vertical. A horizontal facing. Actually, we don't need to take in one for each. Let's just take in one sprite because it's just going to be one direction. Sorry, changed my mind again. One sprite, horizontal facing, horizontal facing. Let's call it horizontal direction. Vertical facing for vertical direction. And game X and a Y. Is that everything I need? Start X, start Y, horizontal fit. Yep, that's all. Okay, so let's close these so that they don't get in the way. Let's make some private data for us to work with. Private const units of game X and Y. Horizontal facing. For horizontal direction. Vertical facing for vertical direction. And then finally a sprite. I think that's all we need, so let's implement our constructor. I'm going to do it inside of the CC class because there's a lot there. Down at the end, I guess. Shut up. Roll polar star, projectile, projectile. Sprite gets sprite. Horizontal direction gets horizontal direction. Vertical direction gets vertical direction. X gets X, Y gets Y. And then there's one more thing we're going to need, and it's an offset, so I'll just set offset to 0. But it doesn't know what it is because we haven't added it yet. So this is going to be units of game, offset. Okay, let's construct it in our start fire method. And let's have a single private variable. I'll just make it a shared pointer to a projectile because that's easier to do right now, and we'll talk about this later. Projectile. Okay, and this projectile is going to get reset whenever we start fire. So projectile dot reset, and this is kind of temporary. New projectile, giving it a sprite. So it's going to be one of two different sprites. If we are vertical facing is horizontal, then we want to use the horizontal projectile. Otherwise, if it's, move this to its own line. Otherwise, if it's vertical, we use the vertical projectile. So that's the first argument. What was the other? What were the others? Horizontal direction, vertical direction, horizontal facing, vertical facing, and X and Y. And this is going to be bullet X and bullet Y. Okay. I'm building just to make sure it's all working. Okay, so now I'm going to add a draw method so that we can draw this. And we'll hold off on update a little bit longer. Void draw, giving it graphics. And let's create it down here below our projectile constructor, polar star, projectile, draw. And this will be sprite, draw, graphics, X and Y. Okay. We should be able to build it and see something if we actually call it. So let's go into our polar star draw and call it, let's call it behind our gun. No, let's call it in front of our gun. So sprite, nope, projectile, draw, graphics. Again, build, sorry. And run it. Okay, yeah, I got a bug, and that's because we're trying to draw the projectile when there's nothing there. So we got to check to make sure that the projectile exists. Whoops. I knew that too, I just forgot to do it. And that's just the way it works sometimes. Okay, so our projectile's gone. Now I press X, and we can fire it from our gun. It doesn't update or anything yet, but that is coming up very soon, and it's coming out the correct direction too, so I'm quite happy. I am quite happy. Alright, so that's been this episode. We'll get it to move and fire on its own and keep track of its lifespan, etc. very soon, probably the next episode. So thanks for watching, guys. Happy developing.